dir noch angesäche, so bist du ihr aller Ehre. Was ist Wundes hier geschäche? Dass ein Magd ein Kind gebar, ihre über aller Engel Schar. Was das nicht ein Wunder gab.
This is The New Right, a podcast for the lost arts, reclaiming the literary holy land from the heathen. This is Dan Baltic, and we again do not have Matt with us this week. He is on clandestine activities somewhere in the desert in California. I can't say more about it, but frankly, you probably don't want to know. So, but I am very pleased to have the guest we have today, Phoebe Neer, who is the organizer of the much acclaimed De Vere Ball. And the De Vere Ball, for those of you who don't know, it's probably very few of us at this point, it's rooted in the quest to determine the true authorship of William Shakespeare's works. So Edward de Vere, it is postulated by some, including Phoebe, that he is the true author of Shakespeare's works. And this was a ball that took place in New York City that drew the creme de la creme of the city to the festivities. And we'll talk more about that. But Phoebe also is not just a party organizer. She is an acclaimed playwright. And her play, Eco Village, debuted, I believe, at St. Clement's Theater originally.
Yeah.
And in 2019, right before COVID, more or less. And recently she adapted that play into a film, which is very good. I've watched it, and all of you should as well. It's I'm sure it had its premiere in Williamsburg recently, and I'm sure will go on to be distributed. And you should check it out. And in addition, she has been trying her hand at fiction writing recently to great success. And she was published by Expat. And it's a story, a short story, I guess maybe like autofiction. And it's really very, very good. I mean, I read a lot of writing for, what I do for the pod. And it's one of the more entertaining things I've come across. And, frankly, we don't have a lot of women in the pod, I must say, Phoebe. So, like, I remember I was reading one of some work to my girlfriend, and she was like, "What is this weird stuff?" But she was like reading over my shoulder, reading your story. And she was like, "This is." She was laughing. She's like, "This is great. This is good writing."
Wow! Thank you so much. That's really high praise. I appreciate your kind words. I appreciate your girlfriend's endorsement. And like I said, a mutual admiration society. I love what you're doing, and your novel is terrific. And
well, thank you, Phoebe.
Yeah.
No, so it's great to have you here. And, thank you for coming on. And I mean, what strikes me the most about you is, you are like a true Renaissance woman. Initially I came to know you. I'm not sure we met at the first De Vere ball that you threw in over the summer in August, but that's kind of like when I came to know of you. And so kind of like moving into like, what is the De Vere ball for those of us who don't know? Like I was originally someone who didn't know. And
Right.
So I was like, on the timeline, and someone is like advertising, there's some ball that Curtis Yarvin and Jack will be at in New York City. And I'm like, yeah, I'll go to that. That sounds pretty cool. And so I bought a ticket. And I think that is probably, And so this is something that like why don't you give me the like you explained this I think on your pod with Nick and Joe and
Yeah.
the kind of genesis of it, but
Yeah.
to recount it again, kind of for people who don't know, this was designed to promote the your not just your theory, but many people's theory that Edward de Vere is Shakespeare, and so or wrote the works of Shakespeare. And so, how did it come from? Like take me from the very beginning. You
Totally.
like found out about Edward de Vere. You found out about this thing, and so how did that turn into a party in New York City that drew Curtis Yarvin and Jack of the Perfume Nationalist?
Yeah, absolutely. So I've been obsessed with Edward de Vere and the Oxfordian theory of Shakespeare authorship for a couple of years now. It was kind of like my big pandemic obsession rabbit hole, and I just got sucked in and just became addicted, and was just like talking about it all the time and reading about it all the time. Wanted to talk to more people about it and wanted to share it. And I think for me, it's twofold. One is like, it's brought me so much joy, just this like electricity that I feel like kind of discovering more and more about like, I think the most interesting, exciting personality, like greatest artistic genius who's ever lived. And I think in like my own personal life, like I find it really inspiring, and the quest to kind of gain this sort of intimacy with him and understand how he operated and what his life was about, and his creative process is rewarding in and of itself. But I also I'm really passionate about supporting the work of these like incredible maverick scholars who are working tirelessly for decades, doing extraordinary work, outside of the kind of cushy, academic institutions, from which they've been exiled forever, basically. And so I think, I wanted to share Oxfordianism with people because I love it. And I wanted to promote the work of the scholars that inspire me, who I think are heroes, like Indiana Jones level. I mean, I know it's like a fictional character, but like, that's how I feel about these like incredible, badass, swashbuckling, like real heroes, like Maimonides level scholarship that's happening like during our lifetimes. It's like, I feel like the way that like aeronautics was having like a big heyday in like the mid 20th century, like that's what's going on right now in the humanities with the greatest literary scoop ever, the biggest breakthrough I think in the humanities of all time, and yet everyone's sleeping on it. And so basically that was my motivation for wanting to spread the word. And so then I was hanging out with some friends of mine, and I was like, I want to like meme Oxfordianism into being a thing. I want more people talking about it. Like, how do I build this like sleeper cell community in New York? Like, how do I get more people talking about it? And like, that's another thing that I've always thought about, which is like, all right. Sorry. There's a lot of different tangents, but basically people are saying, like, people will ask, oh, like, why is Oxfordianism happening now? And I don't have a good reason. I don't have a good answer for that, because for me, it's baffling that
because of Phoebe. That's why.
Thank you. I guess no, literally, yeah, like literally, like one like annoying like theater kid had a dream, but like I think that
no, like literally, like when I talked about with Matt about having you on, I'm just like, the De Vere girl. He's like, oh, the De Vere girl. Okay.
Honored to be the De Vere girl. I'm sure I'm the first of, many, many De Vere girls. And frankly, there are many badass De Vere girls already who are just incredible and are doing a lot more for the field than I am. I think of myself as like, that's why I did the TikTok thing. Cause I was like, I wish that I could be like one of these incredible scholars that are like, connecting the dots and doing incredible primary source research. But like, I know who I am and I know who I'm not, and I'm not that, but I can be like annoying on the internet and like throw like hipster parties and like start a TikTok channel and maybe try and like be kind of like an outreach voice,
Absolutely.
So I was like, that's okay.
Let's just stop right here and plug the TikTok channel. What is it called? So people can look it up.
_de Vere. So my goal with the TikTok channel was to really just, I read a horrifying thing, which was that for Zoomers, like 50% of them don't even use Google as a search engine. Not that that's such a great tragedy, but that they use their primary search engine is like Instagram or TikTok. And so I downloaded the app TikTok, was horrified. Search for Edward de Vere, was horrified that there was no content whatsoever. And so I was like, okay, at least I can create a library on this app that can be, you know, serving people if they search for it. So I built that. That was kind of my project over the summer, was I did like a video like every day for a certain span of time. And I
Highly
should get back to it,
recommended.
but I'm trying to.
I looked at it and like I've learned a lot about Shakespeare from these TikTok videos,
Oh,
or
wonderful.
Edward de Vere, I suppose, and both
Sick.
really.
Yeah, look, you know,
So
people talk about Mark Twain, people talk about Marilyn Monroe, you know, so like these are pseudonyms. So
yeah, no, I mean check it out, Phoebe's TikTok. You will learn about Edward de Vere. But go on,
if
Phoebe.
you're
I
if
don't
you're
mean
bored
to.
on like the toilet and you want to watch an educational Shakespeare video on TikTok, I'm your girl. So yeah, so I'm trying to make more YouTube video content, like basic introductory level stuff, because I think there's so much amazing content that's really high level, but there's a lack of like kind of that first introductory step. So that's slow
Yeah.
going. But anywho, back to the De Vere ball. So basically I was like, you know, well, that's what I always joke. I'm like, you know, talking to like a publicist, like, you have a new client, his name, William Shakespeare. You know, so like that's kind of how I think about it. And I was like, my friend Nick, of the Beautiful Toilet podcast, was like, well, they're
Friend
all
of
these
the pod.
friend of the pod, really one for the ages, a very fascinating dynamic figure who I really care for.
For sure.
He was like, well, there are all these like milady raves that are happening to popularize like this like milady cryptocurrency thing. Why don't you do a De Vere Shakespeare rave? And I was like, that's a stupid idea. What are you talking about? And then I was like, wait, I just had a great idea. I'm going to throw a party. and then you know, so basically the thing about Oxfordianism, which is what it's called, the intellectual movement, which is a disaster. I was like, this is like the SEO problem of all time, because even just doing my TikToks, no one even knows who the fuck Edward de Vere is. Like, at least like Francis Bacon as an alternative theory candidate, like they have a little bit more of a bridgehead because people at least know who he is. And then it's like, I'm trying to raise awareness about Oxfordianism. And then people are like, oh, like, is that about the university? And you're like, what? Or then you talk about the, like, I've had like heartbreaking conversations where I'm going on and laying out the cases for people. And then at the end, they're like, wow, this is fascinating. And they're like, what's the guy's name again? And so I was just like, oh God. And so I was like, I really feel like, you know, the fact that it's Oxfordianism is so alienating and confusing, because American people and even British people, like no one really understands like British gentry as like a system. Like you wouldn't call people by their titles nowadays. Like you know, or you, like if I said, hey, did you see the Sussexes on Oprah? You'd be like, what? But I'm like, did you see Harry and Meghan? You know what I mean? Like people just want.
Are they still Sussexes? I thought they were stripped. No.
Okay, so again, like case in point, I don't know and I don't care. You know what I mean? So, so I'm just like, I don't know anything about Oxford. I don't know, but I know who Edward de Vere is. And I know that I want more people to care about him. And so I was like, I think we need to make it not the branding around this. Like, I think Oxfordianism isn't sticky for people. Like it just is confusing. And it's like the same as the school. Yeah. Whereas if I called it the de Vere ball, people will maybe remember who Edward de Vere was. And so then I was like, I'm going to throw this thing called the de Vere ball.
Okay, just to jump in quickly, it's called Oxfordianism, I think, because Edward de Vere was a lecturer or resident of Oxford in some shape or form.
Yeah, he was the 17th Earl of Oxford. So people would call him, you would call people's like by their landed title or whatever. Yeah. So you call him like Oxford. And then like, you know, Robert Dudley, who was like the Queen Elizabeth's boyfriend a lot, people call him Leicester because he was like the Earl of Leicester. So it's like,
okay. And
it's
so
antiquated and confusing.
The other camp, the camp who believes Shakespeare was Shakespeare, they are the Stratfordians, because that is where William Shakespeare was from, essentially.
Sure, totally. Or I guess they would just say like, we're normal. We're having a normal one. Yeah, I guess like we call them Stratfordians. I don't think
they don't call
that Stratfordian hegemony is so powerful that they don't even need to designate themselves as such. But that's what I'm trying to change.
Yeah. So not to like jump into this too much, but so it seems like the division between Oxfordians and Stratfordians, on some level, there's a sort of like belief that the Oxfordians, being Oxfordians, are embracing a more aristocratic version of Shakespeare. And in fact, the person who kind of like argued the case for it at the De Vere ball was Curtis Yarvin of Dark Elf fame, who is and a noted monarchist, but also a believer in the legitimate role of the aristocracy. And I would say many on the right believe that as well, even the populist right. So maybe you could speak a little bit to is this an issue of class, the division
I guess,
between
it's funny. It's like, I feel like weirdly Curtis is an anomaly in how he came to the Oxfordian movement. Like, I was at the Oxfordian conference in Ashland in September, and it's like a lot of the scholars are like literally like Jewish hippie professors in schools in Vermont and fucking Washington State, and like leftists, like even historically, like Malcolm X is an anti-Stratfordian, like Helen Keller, noted commie, Mark Twain.
No, absolutely,
Mark
like, I mean,
Twain
I feel
wrote
like
a whole book, Walt Whitman, so I feel like it's like, I feel like look, it's like the classist thing is the first thing that they'll hit you with, and it's the last thing that they'll hit you with. You know what I mean? I don't think it's really valid as a criticism. I think it, like, certainly for myself, I have no investment in the aristocracy or anything. I'm just like, for me, it's like, what takes us closer to the beating heart of these works? What makes more sense? How do we get the most juice out of this? Like, and it's very obvious to me that it's just, it's not about, it's funny. It's I guess, with Curtis, who I think did a beautiful job and spoke really eloquently. Like,
he did, yes.
He but he's not representative of how, like, why most people embrace Oxfordianism or get enthusiastic about it. Like, his axe to grind is his own.
Yeah, I can't imagine he's the reason why people have come to. Although, like, maybe the reason why people on, like, the people who came to the ball, like, you've pilled a lot of the right, the dissident right on on De Vere, like, to the extent, like, I think, like, the right, and obviously we can get into this, the reception of the ball on the right, on the left, but I mean, like, those on the right, I think we all know the, like, and frankly, like, it seemed like I never thought of it before. I never even had heard of it before this ball, but I'm listening to it and I'm just like, yeah, it makes sense. So
I think part of why people don't even think about it is weirdly, like, how boring Stratfordianism is. Like, wouldn't you think that Shakespeare would be like a pretty interesting character? Wouldn't you think that, like, the guy who wrote like the most astonishing corpus in the history of, like, the language, like, we're like, that's the thing, is like, I remember being a kid in school and I like loved like Romeo and Juliet when we read it in like 7th grade English or whatever. And then, you have your little Folgers play. And then I remember flipping to the front and, like, what do we know about this guy? Oh, nothing, literally nothing at all.
Yeah.
Nothing sticks in your head. There's nothing mnemonic or charismatic or interesting about it. And it just sort of slides right out of your head. And so it's like, you're not even curious to know more because there's nothing to even spark that interest. And so that's part of what I hope, is that, like, I hope a renaissance or a resurgence of interest in Oxfordianism will make people realize why these works are so vital, why these works are so applicable today. And I just hope it raises interest in general in Shakespeare, because it's like, it dulls it down. I was saying this the other night, like, truth has a signature, like, it has a smell. And I think the reason that we call bullshit is bullshit also has a smell, and I think that, like, what got me immediately hooked on, like, Oxfordianism, and I think everybody listening to your podcast right now has had this experience of, like, you've encountered a piece of news media and you've read it and you're like, this feels like total bullshit. Like, this is not true. You know what I mean? Like, I'm reading something and it just doesn't feel like truth. And Oxfordianism to me is like, oh my God, this feels so, it's just like, it just feels like real life in a way that's vivid, in a way that I think that the Stratfordian narrative, and maybe this is on purpose. Like, I was talking the other day with, about, like, the Bible, right? No, the Bible is basically unattributed as a work, and everyone has this personal relationship with the Bible. The Bible is the most popular, vaunted, engaged with canonical work ever. And it doesn't have an author, quote unquote, or it's God or something. And so part of me was like, maybe I'm doing a disservice to the works of Shakespeare because they created this sort of like Ronald McDonald, like mascot clown paint icon on purpose. You know what I mean? Like Ben Jonson, like I think there was partly, it was like to escape political censorship was part of it, but like maybe there's some way in which having no associations or no baggage attached to the author of these works makes them more universal or makes them more accessible. And maybe I'm doing something bad, maybe to actually cast the light on, like, if you knew who wrote the Bible, would it make the Bible less? I mean, they serve different functions.
Well, I mean, it was obviously like many people who wrote the Bible.
Exactly.
So.
But if you knew about their sex lives, would it change? I mean,
yeah.
Amazing to me about the texture and the rhythm of Shakespeare's language that I feel like is weirdly echoed. I was like, this was a dumb thing, but I was reading it and I was like, you know what this reminds me of? This reminds me of the Bible. And I was like, duh, of course, like obviously, and Edward de Vere, Roger Strittmatter, who's a Oxfordian scholar, does all this incredible work showing how Edward de Vere has this Geneva Bible that he annotates and highlights. And wherever he annotated and highlighted things, those are the verses that end up in the plays. But like, maybe worth pulling up. Like, I love, there's this, a long passage in the book of Job that to me it's like my favorite. And it just sounds like Shakespeare. Like there's something in it that.
Do you want to get it and read it?
Yeah. Can you give me a second?
Yeah. Take your time. Maybe after you read this, you can just give a brief case for, like, I'm sure there are many people who listen to my pod. I feel probably most have heard of the De Vere Ball. They are like,
oh my God, yeah, we still haven't talked about the De Vere Ball.
Well, no, we'll talk about that, but also like, what is the case for Edward de Vere? So after you read this Job thing, just like give like a if you're comfortable, a 3-minute version of like, why is this guy Shakespeare? Why should we believe this?
Yeah. All right. Well, let me see. Maybe I should focus on that right now instead of like randomly like searching the internet.
All right. Yeah, that's bad podcasting. Just give the De Vere case.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Well, so here's the thing. In terms of here's the truth. I think if it was super easy to give a 3-minute version of it, it would be common knowledge by now. So what I find is the easiest way to like kind of, because you can lay out all of the evidence and it's this like death by 1,000 paper cuts and it's like hugely like massive amounts of it. But I think the quickest way to give people a vision is like kind of through metaphor. So what I say is, imagine, or why it matters. So imagine that, it's 1998, you're sitting at home on the couch and you're watching SNL on TV and a actor comes in and he says, I did not have sexual relations with that woman. And then another actor comes in and it's a big dude, fat guy wearing a blue dress. And and then the audience starts laughing. So, okay, so that's the scene and you're watching this on your sofa. So imagine like 400 years in the future, a historian of the future is watching a video of this SNL skit and they're trying to write a book about what it means, why it was funny, but they've never heard of the Monica Lewinsky scandal. And instead of 1998, they think that it dates back to 1978. So that's sort of the state of scholarship on Shakespeare today, which is to say like pretty much like garbage in terms of people, like the historiosity of it. Like it's just misdated, it's miscontextualized. So going back to this like analogy. So, okay, so week after week, back to 1998, you're watching, everyone in the nation is gripped there. Every week you can't wait to see what's going to happen on SNL because they're going there. And like, usually people would not be able to say the kind of shit that they're saying on the air. And so there's like, they're talking about Epstein. They're making fun of like Hillary in ways that are really below the belt. Like it's like these really shocking kind of things that you can't, how can they be saying that on TV? And so like every week, everybody's like, I can't wait to see what's going on SNL. They're really airing the dirty laundry of like the elites. And the person who's publicized the name attached with these scenes, they're written by Jane Shake-Spear. And so, okay, so somebody could be a writer named Jane Shake-Spear. There's probably a Jane Shakespeare in the phone book, but it kind of sounds like it's a pseudonym, like not really a real name. And there's actually rumors going around for people who are like in Hollywood and in New York and in the know that actually Jane Shakespeare is a pseudonym for Chelsea Clinton. So that's sort of like that's kind of the thought experiment for like, imagine somebody who is really highly placed within the government is writing these very edgy and at times like seditious, scandalous works that are commenting on things that are, like, here's the thing. We have this, this kind of halcyon like fantasy of Elizabethan England as this wonderful time to be a writer. And it's like so happy. It was a police state. It was a terrifying place to live. Part of the reason why we think it's so wonderful is due to the propaganda that was like done by Edward de Vere to make this seem like, pro Tudors, like best thing ever. You weren't even allowed, if you were in the Elizabethan court, to leave the country without the monarch's permission. This was like a highly suspicious time where the printing press and the public theater stage had both just been kind of born, and these are the most terrifying threats to government authority that you can imagine. And so there's this kind of counterweight of this huge spy network. Christopher Marlowe murdered by government agents at age 29. Like, everybody's writing under a pseudonym at this time. The big issue of the day
sounds familiar.
Oh, does it sound familiar? For real? And I mean, basically, like, so I talk about the Let's Go Brandon. Have you heard me talk about the Let's Go Brandon of it?
No.
Okay, so basically, this is my metaphor for Stratfordianism. So it's like, imagine that, well, I guess now I have too many, but this is all I think about all day. So it's like, Let's go Brandon, right? So, okay, so people are cheering on this wonderful like race car driver named Brandon. And yay, it's Let's Go Brandon. And then people are going to go to his hometown and they're going to build a monument of a race car. And it's like, Let's Go Brandon. And then it's like, people might be like, oh, who's this guy, Brandon? And they're, oh, he's the great race car driver. We love him so much. Let's go, Brandon. But actually, beneath that, there's a layer where there's actually like a controversial political statement that's being made, but you're making it under a cover of something that seems anodyne. And so that's sort of when the first folio comes out in 1623, long after Will of Stratford's death and long after Edward de Vere's death. This is a time where basically, England has had these really tumultuous, century where it's going from like, we're Catholic, and then we're going to burn the Protestants. Now we're Protestant, we're going to burn the Catholic, burn the Protestants. And basically, so now, James is on the throne, and maybe the Spanish marriage is going to happen, which would mean a big Catholic alliance and possibly going back to this Catholic era. And the noblemen and the highly placed, political figures of the day who were kind of De Vere's camp. He was dead, but he was sort of like their guy, like their symbol. They compile his works and they produce them in this sort of like greatest hits compilation. So, that's what the first folio is. That's where the first time that all of these works are seen together with the name William Shakespeare. Like, at least 16 of the plays had never before even been associated with the name William Shakespeare, although they'd been seen around town and produced. Meant the first time that they're ever attributed to a William Shakespeare is in this like greatest hits compilation with this weird drawing on the cover of it of this person with this very weird shaped head. And this is really, I don't know if you saw the TikTok with the two left arms, like the illusion of it.
No,
this is one of the pinned TikToks on my page, and I think I refer people to it because it's useful to have the visual. So a tailor, talk about like, oh, classist, you're a classist because you don't believe in whatever Stratfordianism. So I think in either 1911 or 1917, a tailor in England writes into his newspaper saying, yo, I'm a tailor and I've been looking at this like image of William Shakespeare in the first folio. And by the way, there are no verified images of what the man actually looked like.
Really?
And he's like,
that's interesting.
Yeah, no. So that's a very long story. I don't even think there's time to get into that, but basically it's kind of like a mascot basically. And so he says, what I noticed as a tailor looking at this image is it has two left arms. So you see his doublet and the right arm is actually sewed on backwards of the left arm as a doublet. So it's almost like this MC Escher style optical illusion with two left arms. And so he writes this in, he's like, that's weird. So basically I kind of lost my thread here, but that's why I'm so tired of the Let's Go Brandon people who are like, it's a race car driver. We love this race car driver. I'm like, please, can we actually try and understand what was really going on here? And and the political statement. So that's when in 1623, when this first folio comes out in this greatest hits compilation, they can't say, we love Edward de Vere. Thank you, Edward de Vere, for your amazing plays. But what they can say is, we don't want to be Catholic. we don't want this Spanish marriage to happen. We are kind of taking a stand. Let's go Shakespeare.
I got it. Yeah. So, I mean, that is some evidence there. And what, because I remember Yarvin speaking on it at length, and there's some other like striking details
Sure,
about
okay.
why. So
yeah,
like,
so like one big thing is, like, for example, Hamlet, Polonius in Hamlet is, this is undisputed, is a dramatization, in some would say a satire or a parody of William Cecil, who was Edward de Vere's ward when he was growing up as a ward under the crown, and then later he marries his daughter, so he becomes his father-in-law. And so this is a person who he has this incredibly kind of uncomfortable and incestuous relationship his entire life, where he's basically, his finances are under control of this like really annoying, manipulative guy who this, and so this is his story. So people will say, oh, well, William Cecil, he was, a famous dude, anybody could have parodied him. No. The way in which he's parodied is not his public persona as a figure of like Elizabeth's Dick Cheney kind of right-hand man. The way in which the details that allow us to know who he is are actually his domestic self. First, for example, the really famous speech where he's like, giving advice to his son who's about to leave for Paris, and it's whatever, brevity is the soul of wit, and so but it's the joke is he's going on and droning on about advice forever. So actually William Cecil published a book called Advice to a Son, and it was all advice that he was writing to his son before the son left for Paris, just like in Hamlet, the son is going to Paris. And so he's going on. And so it's like, they're making fun of, this pompous dad who's going on and on about the advice. Another thing is, and this, we know, this is a wild historical detail. He literally, so his daughter, Anne Cecil, marries Edward de Vere, famously unhappy. I think there's evidence to suggest that she, like Ophelia, maybe killed herself. But basically, William Cecil, during we have letters in his handwriting that are signed from Anne to my husband, Edward de Vere. So we know for a fact this creepy, weird, controlling dad historically was writing love letters in his daughter's name to his future son-in-law. This is real. This is from like a Stratfordian scholar's book, like, of de Vere's life. So this is really weird detail. So whether or not she was copying out in her hand the letters that her dad was writing for her to copy out, or if these were just given to Edward de Vere, we don't know that, but we have letters in his hand. And so in Hamlet, when you see this figure of Polonius who's spying, so if people may know this, like the figure of Polonius is murdered by Hamlet, like by accident, because he's hiding behind a curtain, spying on Hamlet, and then Hamlet like stabs through the curtain. And so it's like, this is his like incredibly meddling, like overly personal. So I'm like, and here's the truth. So that there are even people who would say, and this is again so weird, but there's a
Phoebe, you just cut out for a second.
So this is sort of disputed. There's most Stratfordians. Okay. Basically, yeah. So it's his domestic self. And so the idea that, Will of Stratford is, first of all, 14 years younger than Edward de Vere. And so why would he, and he would be risking his life to be mocking a retired government official, like bad move, people like Ben, like, here's the thing, like Ben Jonson, imprisoned, tortured, Christopher Marlowe murdered. William Shakespeare, we have all the other major writers of the day, or at least have brushes with the law. They're at least censored. They go to jail. They're fined. They're imprisoned. William Shakespeare has a totally clean rap sheet. Isn't that interesting? He never gets into trouble. And he's Mr. Nobody. Like, nobody ever writes, oh, I had lunch or I was at the bar with this guy who's a playwright named William Shakespeare. There's literally zero evidence of that ever. There is zero evidence of people. We have documentation from his life of him getting into like weird litigious lawsuits with his neighbors about like grain and barley and like delivering stones. He seems like a horrible guy. Like this is a funny thing. Like, this isn't Oxfordianism versus Stratfordianism at all, but there was some academic psychology department in like Aberdeen or something in like 10 years ago when they were doing a scholarly study of
just starting to cut out again.
Oh no, I have really bad internet.
No, it's all right.
Okay, should I circle back?
Circle back for
Yeah, so they did this scholarly study at the, like, I think University of Aberdeen, but I'm not sure. It was just a psychology department doing like a psychology exercise, and they basically were looking at like all of his weird lawsuits. I think once he charges like a priest who comes to his house in Stratford upon Avon, he like charges him for a cup of ale or something. Like they were like, this guy's like a sociopath. That was how they like characterized Will of Stratford. You know, he's just like this hustler businessman. His dad was like illegally, basically, you know, the thing that he was the son of a glover. His dad was like also a butcher, also a shepherd, but didn't have a license. And so people were like, he can't have been these things. He was licensed, but he was doing it illegally. I'm getting sidetracked.
No, I mean, that's
evidence.
That's relevant. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So I'm just like, why would he have written this about a guy who was not his father-in-law? Like, this is written, and so even like Hamlet's book, which is, again, widely the book that he brings on, which isn't identified in the play, but through subtle hints within the text, is universally accepted to be Cardanus's Comfort. This is a book that Edward de Vere paid to have published. He like commissioned this work. This was his favorite book, and it's about arms and letters and like how to be like a nobleman. So this is like known to be what Hamlet's book is. Then there are all these like a million other details of like for example, Will of Stratford never left England.
Yeah, that was one thing that really struck me, that the kind of like insight in Shakespeare's various plays into like the intricacies of like even like nautical stuff or whatever. It's just like, it's you wouldn't know that having never left England. So
Correct.
so stuff of that nature. And what really jumped out at me was like, apparently he would sign his name with an X. Is that correct?
Will of Stratford. So we only have 6. Literally the only things that we have from him at all are 6 signatures. I think that they're not even all by his hand. The thing is, if you were like somebody like, most people in Stratford upon Avon were not literate. You know, all the biographies will say we probably must have gone to the grammar school. No evidence of this. And in fact, he was the eldest son in a working class family. And that's who would have gone to work. Like, that would not be who would go to that school, given his like, background. And so basically we have 6 signatures. Again, this is something that's useful to look at. They all are spelled differently. None of them are spelled Shake-Spear, which the hyphen was like, that's like almost like if somebody says they're like, Repeat Respector 35, you don't think that's their real name, you think that's a screen name. A hyphen was the Elizabethan era equivalent of signifying that this was a username. Basically, this is a pseudonym. I see. And so, but none of his Shakespeare has a pseudonym. If you look at most of the spellings of the other people in his family tree, it's like Shaxper. It seems like that, like there's many more spellings of Shaxper. So it seems like it's the medial A, not the long A, but I don't even get into that. But people will be like, his name, I don't care, frankly. But yeah, so we just have these 6 signatures that look like they're not rendered by a literate person. I think there is zero evidence to suspect whatsoever that Will of Stratford was literate at all. I think it's just not. And this is what I say. I'm like, okay, fine. Let's say that there was a guy, and it's possible, okay, so there's the guy who went from an illiterate background, which we know he had. He was not raised in an illiterate family, but he was just a genius and he loved literature, and he went around the world and he educated himself in a variety. He basically gave himself the equivalent of a law degree. Comedy of Errors has 150 legal references alone, and it was probably originally produced in law schools, just the way that like nowadays, like a cappella groups kind of happen on college campuses. Theater was something that happened in these law schools. And so probably Comedy of Errors was something that had a lot of law jokes that would have appealed to law students.
Part of the beginning of our disastrous effect on Western civilization.
Fair enough. But, so that's one of the reasons why people were initially looking at Francis Bacon, because they were like, Shakespeare had to have been a lawyer or somebody who had law training. So let's say Will of Stratford gets really in, studies all this stuff, learns about nautical terms, learns about Italian architecture, even though he's never been there, learns about law, and he writes the most amazing works that have ever been composed in English literature. Okay, cool. Would that person then not teach his kids to read and write? Because
exactly.
That person did not have kids who could read and write. And so that to me is the end of the whole story. I think of Frederick Douglass, who's, was raised as a Black slave, illiterate, and then he kind of rose up and educated himself and wrote these books, and people were skeptical and thought, no way a former Black slave who was illiterate could write these books. Well, the difference there is if you look at Frederick Douglass's kids, you have newspapermen, journalists, teachers. These people were literate. He understood the power of literacy and he taught his kids how to read. So for me, it's just like, what story are we even telling here? Like, how does this narrative even make sense? Like, or even the romance of it. What's romantic about a guy who doesn't teach his kids how to read? Like, I don't get it. First of all, we know that a version of The Tempest was performed in the Elizabethan court as like a courtly revel or entertainment as early as like the 1583, because in 1583, Philip Sidney publishes a volume basically making fun of it and saying like it's called an apology for poetry, and he's talking shit about like he's like not all poetry has to be stupid, like something about a shipwreck or a guy who's like a cannibal on a rock, like so with a primitive guy who's like making rocks and fire, and there's like a shipwreck, and we know that there is documentation of a courtly revel where Edward de Vere participated in, where it was like they had a massive shipwreck, and this is really cool. This is why he bankrupted himself. They had a shipwreck, and like I don't know how they pulled it off, but it was like a stage set and it was a shipwreck. And then out of it, Edward de Vere dances out of it and he delivers Queen Elizabeth a massive jewel. This is like well documented. The French ambassador who was there visiting at the time wrote about it. And so, so this is in the 1580s. And then what they say, this is how they say, this is the Stratfordian case. They say it has to have been published in 1611 because we know that The Tempest must have been based off of William Strachey's descriptions of a Bermuda shipwreck that took place in like 1610. So, first of all, these letters by William Strachey, I mean, have you seen The Tempest?
I have, yeah.
It's not really about a shipwreck. Like there's a lot of stuff that happens. It's actually much more drawn from like pastoral commedia dell'arte. In the beginning, there is a ship that's wrecked. So the whole argument, which is sort of so thin and weird, is premised on this idea that this play couldn't have been written without copying this description of a shipwreck in Bermuda, which is very weird because it's not even a play about a shipwreck. But what's even weirder is that this was a private letter that was written in the early 1600s, but it wasn't,
which of course,
it wasn't published until 1625, again, after Will of Stratford was dead in 1616. So they're saying that somehow he saw this guy's personal letter of correspondence describing this Bermuda shipwreck and then wrote The Tempest. I'm like, that's the thinnest. And even Stratfordians are now backing away from it because it's embarrassing. And there's a Stratfordian scholar who said it, quote, has nothing in common, quote, with the play. But that's the second argument, or the first substantive argument, that they'll try and be like, how stupid are you, weird conspiracy theorist? He's dead. Like he was dead when The Tempest was written. It's like, what are you, like, the thing is, people haven't read Shakespeare. You know what I mean? Like people, because we're sort of in a post-literate society and no one even knows what we're arguing about, people can make these ridiculous claims. Like I was really disappointed, hearing people saying like, oh, well, who says that Shakespeare's a lawyer? Shakespeare wasn't a lawyer. There's not a lot of law like references. And like, that's a silly argument. Like that's below the level of the threshold of what should be required as expertise and competence to even engage in this discussion. I think even just the fact is that the plays are misdated. They're referencing political events that are happening in the 1570s and 1580s. And even like there was, again, Stratfordian scholars keep confounding themselves and being like all confused because there was a guy who did a rigorous and real project where he was using like the kind of like types of slang and language and kind of like cultural references to assess the age of each of these writers. And what he found is he compared like Christopher Marlowe and like and Ben Jonson and then like Shakespeare's plays. And he was like, this is weird. Shakespeare should have been the same age as Christopher Marlowe, but it's actually saying that he's like 14 years older than Christopher Marlowe on the basis of things like, for example, the New World and the Virginia colony and then tobacco. So then all of a sudden, just like nowadays, it'd be really weird if you were reading a play and they were like, oh, it's from the 90s, but it's about crypto bros. You know what I mean? Whereas it would be like, that feels like it's sort of more from like the 2020s or something. That's confusing. So it's like tobacco in like Virginia is something that would have happened like if Shakespeare was young as we think he was, he should have been talking about tobacco, and he never was. He was instead talking about stuff that like an old dude would be talking about. So
so okay, this is what I remembered. I remembered that there is like an actually very good story for why De Vere, disguised his work as Shakespeare's. From what I recall, from what I remember from that speech by Curtis and various readings, that he was, and correct me if I'm wrong, I'm sure I'm getting some details incorrect, but he was disfavored for some reason in the Elizabethan court, and he wanted to get his work published. So he needed, he needed a patsy, he needed a pseudonym, he needed someone to, put his work out there. And that made total sense, because like it's actually very analogous to the situation today. If you want to write stuff that's going to offend people, or if you are disfavored, you need to either write under a pseudonym, and certainly if you're actually the presenter, the producer of these plays, and perhaps Shakespeare was not the producer, but he was probably involved in some capacity in the production, you did need a man on the ground. You in those days, a pseudonym was not enough. You needed someone who actually appeared to be the guy in the theater who did the directing or producing the various activities that are now specialized and other people do them. He needed someone on the ground. And so that makes total sense to me. If you are someone who, if you write a play, no one's going to see it because they're going to be like, the Queen hates that guy. I'm going to get taxed very heavily if I see this. Maybe I'll get beat up. This guy, he'll be shut down immediately. The Queen's men will show up and beat him up. Like, that's not, you're not going to get your place. So like, in my estimation, from what I understand, and I'm probably getting some of this incorrect, but I imagine that De Vere was this guy who just wanted to write. He wanted to get his stuff out there. And he's like, I got to find a way to do this. So I'm going to get this Shakespeare guy, and he's going to be my public face so I could get my writing out there. And so, yeah, that's what I have done with, until recently with Philip Roth. He's been my public face for my writing. So now I need to find a new guy, but.
Cool. Well, no, yeah, I think you're right. So just to kind of add to it, first of all, Robert Prechter, who's like my hero, and he recently published his like 25 volume work that he spent a quarter century doing, and it's finding all the other pseudonyms that Edward de Vere used throughout his whole life. So this is going to turn into a long podcast about Oxfordianism, but that's kind of what I like to do anyway. But basically what he was thinking to himself is, okay, so we have juvenilia from Edward de Vere. We have some song lyrics and poems that are from when he's young, and then nothing. And then all of a sudden a 36 volume compendium of the, then it's like, then Shakespeare plays. So it's like, isn't that weird? It's like, wouldn't you think you would see somebody evolving, or like kind of, how do you wake up one morning when you're 42 and write Hamlet if all you've ever written is some song lyrics when you're like a teen? Yeah. And so he was like, it's quiet, too quiet. And so he dug up a massive amount of work, which shows the progression of these works and how they were being revised and reiterated. And which is funny because Ben Jonson, in his poem about William Shakespeare, says how he's the anvil that's striking twice, how he was obsessed with like correcting and revising. And that was how he worked. And so one thing that Prechter found is that he was doing this all the time. He was often in the practice of, for example, there was a tailor named John God who was in the Tailors Guild. And so what Prechter found is, if you look through Elizabethan letters, there's this really weird phenomenon where there's all of these people who never published anything, published one masterpiece work that seems to have, if not like, seems like it's like almost directly plagiarized from or has identical features to many of Shakespeare's works, and then never published again. So people who would like have one Shakespearean-esque masterpiece and then never publish again. And that's happening all over the place, everywhere you look in this Elizabethan period. So for example, this tailor, John God, publishes like a verse poem that is very similar in style to Venus and Adonis and, Rape of Lucrece and things like this. And so that he was basically, that's Edward de Vere's pseudonym. And so he was a real person. It's an allonym, not just a pseudonym, but an allonym. The idea that you would use somebody who was around and attributed to another person. And so that's what makes the whole thing so sticky. It'd be one thing to say, okay, Mencius Moldbug, not a real person. But wouldn't it be more confusing if like, if it was an allonym instead of a pseudonym. And so it was plausible that this other person could have been the person writing it. But, so that's why we get it all twisted, and it's just really blurry. He was using, people who were choir masters in these boys troops, directors of things, people adjacent to the theater, like for example somebody who was like kind of a backstage hand like Will of Stratford, who then maybe is compensated, let's say, for his work, which was dangerous, as things are heating up, as it's like you could literally go to jail or be killed for writing things that are seditious or controversial. So this is a very weird historical detail, but Elizabeth Trentham, who was Edward de Vere's last wife, has in her will a thing where she's like, please continue to pay an allowance salary to my dumb man. That's weird. What does that mean? And so it seems like it would make sense if this guy is incurring this level of risk. And basically, I think part of why the pseudonymity, not just, I think, because he, has his reputation as an earl to uphold, although I think that's a part of it, but also because as the heat of the Elizabethan succession is sort of accelerating, like imagine the climate of like a US, election where it's like there's no incumbent, nobody knows who's next, and it's going to be everybody playing really dirty. So basically in this climate, Edward de Vere is writing highly political plays, like for example, Richard III, which is parodying the Machiavellian hunchback, who was in fact his brother-in-law, who was Robert Cecil, who was trying to pick the next king. So, he's saying things that are politically controversial. And so, Will of Stratford is incurring risks by being the quote unquote dumb man or front man of these works, and so that's why he's being paid. That's why all of a sudden he gets these, shares in the theater company, why he gets to buy the biggest house in Stratford upon Avon, when, he doesn't have any record of having made money selling plays. And in fact, many of the plays that are published don't have his name on them. And so even though he was very litigious, he's charging a priest for pouring him alcohol. He's suing his neighbors for like barley and all these little things. He never sued a publisher for publishing his works without his name on it or not giving him proceeds. You'd think in his character and personality, he would have been doing that. So he wasn't making money as a playwright. Ben Jonson said that he was never made any money his entire life. And he was, after de Vere died, he was like kind of the head of all these courts and rebels in the Jacobean court. So he was working and very successful, but he made like 200 pounds his whole life. Whereas like Will of Stratford all of a sudden comes into like a massive amount of money that he didn't earn from writing.
Very interesting.
It is very interesting.
There's something going on with this Will of Stratford.
Mm-hmm.
On that note, I think I'm going to refill my drink. I will be right back, and maybe we jump into the reception to the de Vere Ball, and indeed Eco Village and other things.
Super. I'll be here.
All right, so we are back, and we are ready to dive into the not just the evening, but the reception to the de Vere Ball, which was somewhat contentious or divided, but perhaps not entirely surprisingly so. But I think, and I can say I had a very good time. I think everyone who came out had a very good time. And but immediately as soon as it's the photos made their rounds, you kind of had both the Chapo cells and people on the right, the dissident right, whatever you want to call it, weighing in with their opinions about your party. So what say you, Phoebe?
Yeah, I was so relieved that there was any type of response, and was delighted that there was such a vocal response. My biggest fear would be that I was like, it was just going to kind of fizzle out. My goal was to get attention and raise awareness about the Oxfordian theory of Shakespeare authorship. And I think by that metric, it was like a big success. And by the way, for the Chapo cells, like talk about like, I don't know, man, like living in their heads rent free. Like, did you see the freaking the GQ profile of the Chapo guys that just came out?
Oh no, I avoid most traditional media.
No, me too. But like Nick sent this to me, so they're being profiled in GQ, which is just funny, given
Yeah, no, of course they're very anti-establishment.
They're very anti-establishment with their GQ photo shoot. But anyway. so they go, this is Will Menaker talking. I think the one thing that we can agree on, though, is that it's of the utmost importance to establish the provenance of Shakespeare's plays. People need to be very aware that the person we think of as William Shakespeare is not actually the person who wrote the plays. It's actually the Earl of Oxford, not some low-born son of a Glover. This is the issue that's tearing New York apart right now. I got to get the fuck out of there. And then the interviewer says, Dime Square is up in arms. And then one of the other guys goes, you can't have people walking around. Listen, it goes on and on. He goes, you can't have people walking around thinking a commoner wrote The Tempest. The guy says, all I can say about it all is that there seems to be about 7 people that have had 40 articles written about them. And the guy goes, right. In the same way that the dirtbag left was actually a very small circle. And then they say, well, basically walking around Brooklyn now, it's like the Jets and the Sharks. There's the Stratfordians and the Oxfordians. And when they see each other, they're wearing different bandanas to signify their allegiance to either William Shakespeare or Edward de Vere. And there's rumbles happening. And I'm trying to stay neutral on this. I don't want to get caught in the crossfire. So I'm like, that's amazing.
Oh,
like,
no, yeah, absolutely.
This is like incredible press. Like, I'm like, I don't know if they're trying to mock me or like, not me. I don't think like,
yeah, even if they are, like,
even if they are, like, what, talk about a wonderful homage. I'm like, I couldn't have paid for somebody to say like cooler things that make it seem like more cool to be an Oxfordian. Like, I was blown away by this. So,
like if you could take kind of like a cross section, like I now know, like, not just because you've been on the pod, but because I went to the party and otherwise I probably would have heard about it. I know about the Edward de Vere Shakespeare authorship question, and Will Menaker does. And like we occupy like different media, different, I'm sure I read very little of the stuff he does. He probably reads very little of the stuff I do. And regardless, we both, have heard about this, and, and that is, entirely thanks to you and your crew of people who put this on, which may be a good opportunity to kind of name drop the people who helped you, make this happen.
Totally. Well, shout out to amazing Larissa something on Twitter, who is my Twitter wife and co-conspirator, Junker Joe, who is so badass. I thought her reading at the event that you guys were both at, the Terror House event, was
absolutely.
I was so proud of her. Like, she is a fierce, like, people haven't even begun. I know she has like a big Twitter following and people like know who she is and stuff, but like people have not even begun to see the tip of the iceberg of what she's capable of. Like, she's entering her mommy blogger era, and like, I think is, going to be an unstoppable force. Jack, the perfume nationalist, came along for the ride and was a good sport, and, added his signature brand of je ne sais quoi to the proceedings. And Curtis, who I knew from a while back, and I knew he was an Oxfordian, and so I asked him to write an article for the zine. His wonderful daughter also wrote an article for the zine, and they both came and dressed up and were, wonderful. So yeah, big shout out to them. I was really grateful that the Red Scare girls, showed up and tweeted about it. That was awesome. And
Dasha won Best Dressed, as I recall.
Yes, Dasha won Best Dressed. Yes. So yeah, those are I think the kind of bold-faced names. Matt Forney was seen in many photos. And yeah, that was the party. I think like that's the kind of funny thing, it was way too easy to hack people's attention. Clearly there is a very low like antibiotic ability right now for mainstream institutions to kind of defend themselves against getting hacked in this way. Clearly it's too boring what's being sold. Like the fact that, like, again, like, I think Will Menaker is right, or whoever said it in the Chapo article, like there are 7 people getting 40 articles written about them each, and I think that the fact that like people are like, the party was kind of mid, like I think everyone had a nice time, but it was not any of what people perceived it to be were wrong. You know what I mean? Like, I think it was a pretty fun, wholesome cocktail party.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Where Hank Whittemore, who, oh my God, I can't believe I didn't mention him. Hank Whittemore, one of my heroes, incredible scholar, came and recited sonnets, and, people brought their kids, and it was like wonderful and wholesome. Oh, and oh my God. And fucking Zalame, Pariah the doll. That was impromptu. That was probably my favorite moment of the evening, was that I was all stressed out because the lute player hadn't brought an amp because our first string lute player had COVID. So he sent in a backup guy, but then he didn't have an amp. And so it was too quiet. And I was like miserable and losing my mind. And then like Zalame approached me and was like, I want to sing. And I was like, excellent. And so that came spontaneously. So that was like my favorite moment. And I think that kind of encapsulated the spirit of what the event was about, which is like, let's celebrate culture. Let's be theater dorks and, you know, hang out together.
Absolutely.
So I think that what people imagined that the party was, I think people imagined it as like, I guess like it was so weird for me to be like, oh, people think that I'm not actually sincere about my interest in Oxfordianism. Like, LOL, like jokes on them. Like,
Yeah.
literally, like, you know, that was just like the last thing I would imagine was that people wouldn't, you know, like it's an obvious assumption for people to make that I was trying to go for some sort of like sedevacantism, like trad cath, like aloof, dark academia, hipster vibe. Whereas it's like, no, like this is like obviously like my big fat gay Jewish, like, you know, Shakespeare party, you know, and like, why wouldn't people assume that was straightforward? But people just didn't know me or have the context, or their framing was wrong. Or if I'm being honest, I was a little bit cheeky in my framing of it by inviting those figures there to be heard from. And yeah, like people love to get mad. I felt sad because I was like, I think people are like, I was like, the sad feeling, if I felt one besides glee and happiness, was like, it bums me out that people clearly like want to go to a party, like for real. Like there was clearly like people were so jealous or resentful or felt like they're being shut out of something. And I'm like, I would have loved for them to be there. You know what I mean? Like the people that are photoshopping like guns shooting, you know, cross target, like whatever, like guns at the party or whatever, like these are the worst people in the world, like are clearly like lonely and probably like would be really nice and sweet if you met them. Like, you know, I don't know. I didn't want to make people feel bad, but
I mean, this was a real like cross section of people that it, you know, like for instance, I go to a number of like New York City cocktail type parties in the, you know, more mainstream literary circles, just for various reasons. And so this is like the only sort of literary event where I could argue why it should be Trump instead of DeSantis, with like a kind of like more neocon type, you know, individual. Like I can't argue for Trump at like, you know, normal literary events. I would be
maybe I'm not giving myself credit for how unique it was as an event.
Yeah, I mean, like I think you had people more like me there. You had people like you know, more kind of just center right people, lawyers or whatever, who are more.
I had
like
people from my synagogue who were like, "Oh, Phoebe's hosting an event. Let's show up." And
there you go.
Have no idea who any of these other. You know, it was just very eclectic in terms of who was there.
Yeah, exactly. And people were not really closed-minded. They were like yeah, I was talking to like Claremont Fellows, and it's like an anonymous internet shit posters talking with, you know, scholars, and it it was a really good night, and, you know, kudos to you for pulling it off and getting everyone together, and for your whole team for, you know,
thank you. Yeah, no, I mean, I couldn't have done it
happen.
without them. Like, I think for me, the real lesson and a takeaway was how grateful I am to have such solid, supportive friends. You know, even in the midst of the kind of weird maelstrom of the internet attention and the hate, like, which I mean, if, you know, if I were subjected to that every day, like if somebody's like a celebrity and they're just dealing with that constantly, it's hard. It gets to you, you know what I mean? And like the stupidest, dumb, little weird thing is the thing that ends up like, you think about it like late at night, you know what I mean? Like it is weird like that. And so having people, like, I think what made me feel good was that even though people could make these like wild speculations and talk shit about the party, I knew that everybody who was there was my friend and would, you know, vouch for me and not make fun of break ranks, you know. So that made me feel strong and confident when people were getting it so wrong, or, you know, saying whatever they wanted to say in good or bad faith, you know, depending on their persuasion. Yeah, and another thing is like when you talk about the cocktail party, like I do think it's like, because I'm sure you're going, when you're talking about the events that you're going to, they're like pretty nice, or like there's glam events, whereas like maybe it's maybe like a bunch of people on Twitter, like Joe was joking about how like everyone was saying it was Peter Thiel funded, and it's like we had plastic cups, like we had a cheese plate. And so it's like people see pictures of like people at a cocktail party having cheese on a plate and think like, this is unimaginable luxury. Like, what billionaire is funding this? And it's just like,
Yeah.
that's so sad. We're in this like really impoverished landscape. So yeah, no, but I'm looking forward to the winter ball.
Absolutely. And that is happening. Correct me if I'm wrong, but January 28th.
Correct,
Everyone
sir.
should get tickets to Vere Ball Part 2. It breaks the internet. It breaks New York City. Who knows what will happen.
I
It's
certainly
an
don't know.
it's a night of mystery and intrigue.
Yeah, no, I hope it will be. I mean, I'm trying to think like what
Well,
are the outcomes?
any scoops, any headliners that we should know? Will Curtis or Jack be returning?
I'm not going to speak on the lineup. I really want people to be surprised. We have some
Okay.
tricks up our sleeves, some returning guests. We have some never before seen guests. I feel like it's going to be pretty good. And yeah, I don't know. It's funny because it's like I feel like there is going to be inevitably like more exposure this time, or like I'm still waiting for somebody to write that piece about like, the Oxfordianism dime square trend or something. And it's kind of wild to me that it hasn't happened yet. And
That
I'm
is
like,
wild. I would think it would have happened, but
I know it's funny. I think like journalists are so fucking dumb. People are
yeah.
so lazy and dumb. Like they're just so dumb and lazy.
Well,
That's
I hope they keep being dumb and lazy because I don't want to get doxxed.
totally. No, I know it. No, I know.
But
No, because I'm thinking, I'm like, I'm eventually like, I'm out there and I'm using my full name, but like eventually, like they're going to kind of come for me. And
yeah.
I hope like my prayer is, look, I see myself as this very, very, very small piece of this long lineage and tradition of like Oxfordianism, and people like starting like Ben Jonson as the original, let's say Saul of Tarsus of the whole shebang, and like, the people that have fought to bring the truth to light and have, you know, busted their asses. And then I'm like this, for me, I think of myself as like, in the battlefield, there's the guy on the horse. There's, what's it called? Oh my God. The guy with the trumpet who comes out in a war and they're like, like,
Yeah.
what's that called? This, not the
Well,
steward, the herald. I'm the herald.
okay. Yeah.
I'm just trying to be like a sassy little herald that's going to, bring attention to the incredible scholarly work that's been done by people that are so much smarter and harder working than me. So I
Yeah.
don't know. I
And I
try to
think you
stay
really did
humble.
that. That's like, it's
Thanks.
like people know it. Yeah. I mean, I don't think like they could have had a better, like, I don't think an academic movement has had a more committed and better spokesman than the Shakespeare authors. I mean, like it goes to the point where like, and this is probably a good segue into Eco Village. Like
Sure.
when you invited me to attend the premiere again, sorry I couldn't make it. It
Yeah,
was
I'll
a
just
busy
say it's
work
not a
week.
premiere. It was like a small private screening. It's important to have that distinction
Oh,
for
all right.
like festival submissions, etc. That was
Got
just like
you.
a chill thing that
Okay.
we were hanging out watching the movie. Private
Got
friends,
you.
close friends.
But yeah, so when I got that invitation, I thought, okay, this is almost certainly a documentary about Vere. And I'm just like, yeah, it was a busy week anyways, but I'm just like, I know a lot about this DeVere guy by now. But I mean, that is the extent to which you have like kind of melded yourself with the Shakespeare authorship question, and like to the extent to which you've publicized it and made it like, I mean, I think, yeah, academic movements have not had better publicists than you. So
Wow, I'm so honored. Thank you.
I've never thought of academic movements having a publicist. So this is like even new ground.
I'm trying to think. I'm thinking about the Netflix series right now with Graham Hancock,
Yeah.
Ancient
No, I've
Apocalypse.
been watching that. That's yeah. No, it's yeah,
I
I mean that's another like part of like my notes, and like we could just get into that right now and then get into Eco Village later. But you're frozen for a moment, Phoebe.
We can talk about Eco Village now if you want.
All right, you're
Sorry.
back. You froze for a moment, but yeah. So
Thanks.
okay, so we can we'll I think jump into Eco Village if that's
Let's do it. Yeah.
yeah. So I watched this the other night, and frankly, I was very impressed. It was
Thank
very
you.
entertaining, very well done. It's based on a play that you did at St. Clement's, and just in brief, it is a girl who is attracted to this commune type environment. She sees a commercial for it online. She wants to go. She drops everything. It's not clear what is even going on in her life that she drops, but she drops it. She hitchhikes to get to this commune. She gets there, and everyone there is like a dick to her. It's weird. And she's like, trying to fit in with these kind of like hippies, but also like very like aggressive and like socially competitive hippies. It as the movie goes on, I don't want to give any spoilers, but it becomes more of like a cult environment, and it's kind of like an uncomfortable situation that she finds herself in. She also has a love interest, and that's part of it. How the love interest, the love interest name is Jake. The girl is Robin. And and so like it's a love story set against a backdrop of a cult, basically a kind of like commune like cult. And
Wow.
it was to me very reminiscent of I think in my notes I said Christopher Guest meets David Lynch, or maybe even toward the end. I'm not going to give any spoilers, but there are like twists and turns that make it even like David Fincher-esque. And so it's like this weird meld of farce meets kind of like thriller caper. And like it's something I haven't seen done in a long time. It's done very well. And it kind of like excoriates this kind of like commune hippie progressive class, while also you find out in some respects that it's very critical of the kind of like PMC, even upper class, wealthy, moneyed class as well. So this is like a kind of it actually it felt vaguely I mean this is in the news right now, or in the culture, very White Lotus-y in a sense, kind of like had an incisive take on the current cultural moment from a perspective that is clearly not like establishment progressive. I think it probably is a disservice to even try to describe what political slant the perspective has. It's but it's a critical take on our current cultural moment. But I've said too much. You
No,
tell
yeah,
me.
thank you. No, it's funny. This is like the first like interview I've done about the movie. So it's funny. It's like I've talked a lot about Edward de Vere, and it's like this is like this is like I'm shifting
Yeah.
gears. So it's cool. Thank you. I love that as a summary. It was sort of based off of an experience that I had. It's funny you say like a love story with the backdrop of a cult, which is like basically it's based off of the summer after college. I went to the Bread and Puppet Theater in Vermont, which is like, I wouldn't say it's famous, like it has a history in it. People like who are in theater circles have heard of it. It was really amazing. And I was like, I fell in love there for the first time against the backdrop of this like really culty, weird community. And I think for me, it was like this sort of juxtaposition of like the kind of terror of what it felt like to fall in love versus what I'd always imagined it would feel like, and how much more like brutal and bloody and upsetting it was as an experience, and just the kind of anxiety and the desire for control and falling for somebody who was bad news in many respects, or complicated, and my own blind spots. And that kind of felt.
You froze for a moment there, Phoebe.
The landscape of this like extraordinarily beautiful. All my fault.
No
Can you hear me now?
I hear
Okay,
you
yeah.
now. Yeah. So you were describing how you fell in love, and it was with someone who perhaps had some issues himself.
Or like, what is love? Like or it was like, what did I want from this person? What was it that I was like?
Yeah.
Let me turn off the video for like a second. Is this better?
Yeah.
Okay.
So far, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, no, and I think it was like, I think I was just like wanting, yeah, and just it was like against the backdrop of like this place that was so idealistic on its surface and so beautiful, and it was like this beautiful vision of like nature, but like what is nature? What is human nature? And I think I was struggling with that question, like trying to understand like how can you have dignity in sexuality where so much of ourselves is hidden from ourselves, like so much of our motivations are secret even to ourselves, in terms of especially what attracts us to other people. So that was kind of what I wanted to capture in the play, and then it kind of changed a lot in translation from the play to the screen, but I'm really proud of the movie. It was hard. Movie making as a theater person, I think I underestimated. I'm like, oh, I'm a theater person, I get what it's about. Filmmaking was really challenging, and just like the physical kind of grueling nature of it, and how technological it is, and yeah, it was hard. So I'm like, the play weirdly disappointed me in terms of how it came out. Like it was like, it just, I never felt watching it like I captured it. I felt like the kind of chemistry was off between the leads, and just like the humor and the beats and the pacing, like it just didn't click together. And I feel like that was like reflected in like the reviews or whatever that we got, which who cares? But like, it was just like, I was disappointed with how the play turned out. Whereas with the movie, it was like a brutal, miserable experience in a lot of ways, whereas the play was sort of a happier, somewhat experience. And yet I feel like when I watched the movie, I'm like, oh yeah, I did it. Like I captured it. And I think that speaks to kind of like the differences and the kind of perverted incentives, and like the kind of in film where you can just sort of like have a horrible time. But if what the camera captures looks pretty, you're in good shape. So it's like kind of weird.
Yeah. And so this play was what in like the industry would be called, I assume it was a play with music. So it's
No,
a,
nope,
no?
wasn't. That changed in the movie when I adapted it to screen, because
Okay.
weirdly I read like my friend's dad wrote a book about like of how to make it in the movies, and I guess I'll plug the book. Dean Silvers' book. Like my friend Tyler Silvers was like, you should read my dad's book. And I read his dad's book, and it was talking about like, if you're a first time filmmaker, like what genre should you make? And they're like, well, everyone makes a drama or a comedy, but if you make like a sci-fi thing, it's different. And then I was like, I should make a musical, because I'm a musical theater person. And I feel like that will translate really well, and it'll help enhance the story. And it became my favorite part about the movie. Like I'm so proud of the music.
Yeah.
And I also did the soundtrack.
Was
with
that your
me.
songs?
Yeah.
I thought so, because that you were singing those
Yeah.
songs, right? All right. I thought that was your voice. Yeah.
Yeah.
So that
Yeah.
yeah,
So
no, good songs. Like
thanks.
yeah.
Yeah, I'm really proud of the musical elements. That was really for me what the film was about. And the parts that I'm proudest of. So, we're in the midst of this journey now of at the very beginning of, screening it for friends and people, and trying to get people's eyes on it, and then submitting it to festivals, and
Yeah.
figure out
You're
what kind
cutting out there.
of,
We'll hopefully have you back in a moment. All right. Now you're back.
Okay. Yeah.
So you're submitting it to friends, and you're at this point where I assume you're submitting it to festivals. Yep. And trying to find a distributor. Yep. And yeah, like, I think that this, at this kind of like current cultural moment, it's like, it's a good sell. Like, I mean, it's Thanks. Not going to really alienate anyone, but it That's also is like critical of the current, like it felt very, not like it in many ways, but as I said at the beginning, very White Lotus-y, very Succession-y, perhaps, you are a playwright, and playwrights have written many of the Succession episodes, so maybe there's some magic in the water there. But yeah, what struck me also was just kind of, I don't want to give away any spoilers, but like you think it's one thing, it becomes something else. And so the parts that didn't, like watching it, that didn't make sense at the beginning, by the end completely make sense. And
Thanks. No, that's the scary part. And like my control freakness of it is such a slow burn. And it is kind of like this onion where you kind of peel the layers. And I think you really don't get, I feel like you don't really have the sense of satisfaction of knowing what it is that you just watched until the last like 10 minutes of it. And so it really asks a lot of the audience to kind of like bear with me and to like trust that it's going in a direction and to not be like, oh, this isn't my kind of thing, and peeling off. So that's why I think like kind of figuring out how to like present it to people or crafting it or hoping that like that kind of buzz starts to generate or that people think that it's worth sitting with. Just because it is sort of like it kind of creeps up on you. So, prayers up.
As someone with a novel where the epilogue, the last 2 or 3 pages, completely recasts your understanding of the novel, I very much like the kind of like the button endings that kind of make you reconsider the whole piece.
That's, what, you're right. And I think that is frankly what people find twists, like, you know what I mean? Like, that's the thing. It's like, I love twists. Like, I'm a big plot person. I'm a big story person.
Yeah.
And there's nothing that gets like kind of like, blows my skirt up more than thinking that you're in one thing and then trusting the artist or, the person who created the work to kind of flip it over.
Yeah.
And that is the most sensitive thing. But in order to execute that device, sorry, I think my neighbors are watching soccer, I'm going to assume.
No, it's I didn't hear anything.
I'm finding it annoying. I'm like, guys, relax.
Oh, I can't even hear it.
Okay, fair enough. Yeah, no, in order to execute a twist, you have to sell people something else and have them sit with it for a while. So that's always me. I'm always like, if you can get in like 40 minutes into it, you'll think, and then I'm like, just wait. And so, no, but people have responded really well. Like, it's been gratifying. Like, I think I get increasingly confident. Like, each of these little screenings that I have, it feels like I can trust the material now and that people show up and enjoy it.
Yeah.
That's the thing. It's funny because you watched it at home. You had to watch it because we were doing this interview. But it's like, I think that it's like what I've had so far, most of the experiences are these like screenings in person, which I think is like the ideal way to experience a movie, and it's so much more fun. So the hope, I guess, is that like people hear through the grapevine that it's worth, even if they're at home watching it, like sticking with it. So
yeah, it absolutely is. It is something that I haven't really seen recently. It's, like it's a good, teen comedy, thriller, farce. Like it's like a wet hot American summer meets Twin Peaks.
That's actually really fun. Cool.
Yeah, so it's good. People should see it. I mean, when they can see it, but they will see it. Yeah. So this is based somewhat on your own, as you said, personal experience. Like what was that like? I assume bred in theater, like there was some element of like you're in this theater commune and you have to like contribute to the communal health of the community by doing like farm work or something. Or
but I'm so lazy. I didn't do much farm work, but so is everyone else. And so you had to, let me see, I'm getting myself more water.
I mean, part of sorry to cut you off, but part of the Eco Village, the play, the film was she's a fish out of water, and like she meets Jake, and she meets these kind of like, okay, yes, the woman who runs the place, Ursula, is very much probably of her own social class, more or less. She's a Wall Street dominatrix. I don't think that gives anything away, but like Jake seems to be more maybe working class, hard to say. And, some of the other people there seem to be out of her social class. And so.
Yeah, it was very weird. I was definitely a fish out of water. I'd like never been camping before. And then I was like, living in a tent, and that was cool. And that's what I wanted and why I went there. But I definitely felt, it's funny, I'm very different now today. And I think people would be surprised by how much I've kind of shifted in terms of like, I'm much more comfortable in like sort of like hippie countercultures, or I think weirdly, like people perceive me as like that type of person, like kind of crunchy granola, whereas that was like not necessarily how I was, especially within that like I seemed very like nervous and weird. Something happened like the first week that I was there, which was that it was, you know, it's like they're doing like political theater. You were in these like political theater kind of things. And so there was like a Gaza war that broke out. And so then Peter Schumann, who is like kind of the creative director of the whole thing, he's like very anti-Israel. And so the puppet show that we were all supposed to be in was like, Israel was this big garbage bag monster. And then the Palestinians were like these little naked, like kind of people puppets. And I was like, I was like, I'm going to just clean dishes and like participate in the commune life in other ways this week, but I'm not going to be in the show. And I thought that was chill. And it wasn't at all. People really kind of swarmed me. And I felt very cast out, like just immediately upon arrival. Like this was really early. And I was like, oh, damn, like, okay, I've really marked myself as sort of not somebody that can like fit in here. And that was weird. And then just like I think what it was, you know, you couldn't use your cell phone. Like there was one phone and it was like a landline and it was like in the middle of the living room. And so privacy becomes so important in an environment where it's so scarce. And so everybody was kind of so aloof. And there was this weird like it's funny, I'm just having a flashback to this girl being like, go ahead. Yeah. This girl, she's like, I remember this girl saying like, this place is not a safe queer space. And I just like, and it wasn't like straight up, like it was like basically like it wasn't a safe anything space. Like it was basically like everyone was fucking everybody, but it was all kind of a secret. And like every morning when you showed up at breakfast, somebody would be like crying, but you wouldn't know why. And it was like it was just like, it was a very weird culture. And so this is the other thing is like I got in off the wait list, which is funny. You had to apply in to be an apprentice, quote unquote. And an apprentice meant that you were paying to be there, which was funny because it was like a lot of like, you know, art school dropout hipster kids who are like on food stamps and they're like paying to be here. And then the other tier of the people were the full-time staff, and literally your wage, what you were paying as an apprentice was literally directly paying their wages. And so on the one hand, it was people who were all the same age, largely the same levels of experience as professional artists, but like half of the people's are paying to be there. And that money is going to the other half of the people, but they all have the same amount of rights and responsibility, which is none. And Peter Schumann has no successor. And so he's kind of a genius guy. Like I have a lot of respect for what he built. Like, frankly, he just did the work and is a genius and a really industrious man. But he very intentionally, it was him and no one else. And so he would start like these puppet shows he would sit on the top of a school bus that was like these cool painted school buses where people lived. And then he would put on these like stilts, and then he learned how to play two trumpets at once, like out of both sides of his mouth. Oh, and so wow. That's pretty hard. It's hard. And so these puppet shows would start with this like very charismatic old dude who was like, boop, boop, like playing both trumpets at the same time. And then everybody else was behind these puppets. And so he was like the face of the whole thing. And then the rest of us were like holding these shitty old puppets, which are from the 70s. And so he has this 3-story barn where all of these old puppets are living, and they're all filled with like rusty nails and mouse poop and smell really bad. And the first thing they tell you when you show up is, and remember, these are people that are like art students, like you had to apply to get into this place. They say, if you make anything, you either have to take it home with you or burn it. So your work as an artist is not going to be featured in these shows at all. And so it was just this weird thing where it's like, what do you do when you get a bunch of like, basically like kind of drifter, like miscreant artists who don't have work to do, but they're just they're all going to fuck each other and make trouble. You know what I mean? So it was like, basically, yeah, that was what happened. And so, it was paradise in some weird ways. And then it was also just like the Lord of the Flies and others. Like it was just so passive aggressive and weird. Like I remember at lunch, there used to be like announcements because people were losing their shit all the time. And so you would make an announcement and just be like, hey, I left my backpack by the lake, if anyone saw it. And if you were popular and high status, people would like listen and like when you made your announcement. And then if you were not popular or low status, people just talk over your announcement. And I was just like, guys, why don't we all just shut up and listen to each other's announcements? Like, why does it have to be like this like harrowing thing? And it just had to be because there was no other ways to demarcate status, because no one was making money really, or like, it was all Peter Schumann's. And so popularity was all that mattered. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, when you don't have, and I think I said this on another pod, when you don't have titles, when you don't have like, and so I was describing the dissident right,
as one of the reasons why we're all at each other's throats so
Yeah.
much is there's no demarcations of who controls what. So
Hmm.
like when you don't have like in the mainstream media, you have like this person is the executive producer of this or the executive editor or whatever. And like in, this kind of culture that we've created on our side of the internet, yeah, it's kind of like everyone is, equal, which means everyone is, doesn't know where they stand. So they're
Yeah.
all kind of jockeying with each other. And it sounds very similar to what you're describing there. So yeah, your experience at Bread and Puppet Theater Company, it I mean, I imagine the milieu that you were in there was primarily, I mean, theater people, obviously,
It was
literary
definitely like a
people.
leftist thing.
Yeah, yeah. I spent a summer in Yellowstone National Park working. So I had applied for it. Just I was 19, and I just literally Googled cool summer jobs, and found this kind of like mega corporation that governs or controls the hospitality at national parks. So I applied to be a housekeeper at Yellowstone National Park so I could hang out in the park for the summer. And the interesting thing is, like, I got there and like for me, it was a similar kind of like fish out of water because like I was 19, very much a straight arrow, good high school student, was, attending a very good college. And this was just kind of like, I'll do something fun this summer while my friends are interning at magazines or at banks or whatever. I'll be at Yellowstone National Park. And so I assumed that my like fellow workers would be kind of like, not exactly like me, but like kind of like Boy Scout types, like Captain America types, like very much like, oh, I like to go in the park. And there were some of those. There were. But apparently like a lot of people work in, I didn't realize this at the time, a lot of people work in national parks for the summer because you're very far away from drugs to dry out. So there are a lot of recovering addicts. And so that introduced me to a whole subculture, a group of people that a kind of like a not too world weary 19-year-old me was like, oh hey, so you cook meth. That's a cool thing, I
Wow.
guess. And yeah, so it was. I mean, it's very much like I feel like there are like these kind of like summer rural adventures or what have you, where you're placed in kind of like, it draws people from all over. And then suddenly, I assume at Bread and Theater as well, you're far away from society, like in Yellowstone, like literally hundreds of miles in every direction. There's just park. So it's just like, just you and these people. And so you have to form relationships with these people. There's no one else. You like
It's funny you say that.
anything.
I'm curious when you're saying the you and these people, like, because for me, like, no, it sounds very similar as experiences. I'm curious in your experience, like, what role there was like you and these people, and then this like giant park. And I'm curious as to like what, as a 19-year-old or whatever, you kind of picked up from the nature. Like, how did the natural landscape inform the interpersonal behavior, or did it, or it feels like the characters maybe were more kind of predominant in your experience? Like, I'm curious as to how, like what you learned about nature in that like summer, or
So
what your
like
previous exposure had been.
my previous exposure, I grew up in New York City, had been very little. I not a nature person, so this was, yeah, very much new to me. And so the way it shaped the social dynamics was also, it was interesting because like on days off, people would get together and we'd go out into the park. So like it made sense. It was actually a very social environment because you don't want to go out in the park alone, both for safety reasons. You like literally like you turn like we turn trail corners and there's like a buffalo 10 feet away. The buffalo can kill you. Bears can kill you. So like you want to be with other people. So, but beyond that, like it's just like you want to be with other people generally. You want to experience the park with other people. So yeah, it was like a really communal environment. Like you like and also like someone's working one schedule, someone's working another. So like, you might go on a all day hike with people you don't even know or like very much, but it's just like, hey, I want to hike, I want to see the park, we're gonna do it. And yeah, so it was good. It kind of like really mixed people up. And I met people who I wouldn't have met. And one thing that I will always take away is having been having grown up in New York City. We're still in New York City. This whole scene or everyone is in New York City.
Life sentence.
Yeah. Um, the sky in Yellowstone was like nothing I had ever seen before or since, frankly. Just like totally, like there's something, it's one thing to be like in the woods in like, I don't know, Long Island or in the woods
Yeah.
in like, Pennsylvania. It's another to be like in the woods in Montana or Wyoming, where like literally for hundreds or even thousands of miles, there's no like real lights. I mean, there's Bozeman, Montana, there's a few others, Jackson Hole, but there's not that much. So like the night sky was just like, in New York City, you can see a couple of stars. In Yellowstone National Park at night, you see all of them. And that was incredible. I still remember that.
Yeah, no, just getting back to Ancient Apocalypse, the sky, and like, which obviously played such a huge role in like the ancients' understanding of the world and is such a focus and obsession, whereas like that's not what we talk about in New York City.
No, we rarely see anything when we look up there, which is sad. It's and you suddenly realize when you're, in a place like Yellowstone or wherever, like how much there is to see. And yeah. And that like maybe like kind of takes us to there's so much to see that we are not seeing, and that is this kind of like current culture. You mentioned ancient apocalypse, and that's a documentary series on Netflix where Graham Hancock, who is a journalist, an investigative journalist, is exploring archaeological mysteries, postulating that there is a potentially lost civilization before what we consider to be not even history but prehistory. That there's a prehistoric lost, essentially Atlantis or an Atlantis-like civilization that was lost. And there's like good reason to believe this. Like if you watch the documentary series, there's like interesting stuff that the mainstream archaeological community has prevented from getting out there. And this is something that we've talked about. It's in our notes. This is something that you are very familiar with the Edward de Vere question. There in across, it feels like we're at a unique moment because of the woke stuff or whatever, and the various kind of like centralizing power, the regime, or if you want to use the Yarvin version, the cathedral, or whatever. There is a kind of like consensus that has kind of emerged where like in any given industry you need to trust the science, you need to trust trust the people in charge because they know what's right. And what has happened is so for like archaeology, these really interesting theories are being ignored. In literature, these really interesting theories about Edward de Vere and Shakespeare authorship are being ignored or suppressed. And I mean, that's true more broadly. And so, like, I tie this to my own personal experience, like writing. I recently, as my viewers, readers, listeners are for sure aware, I wrote a novel called Nutcracker, published by Terror House Press. Thank you. And so, like, this is a novel. I did submit it around to different agents, no bites. Probably not surprisingly. If I were an agent, I wouldn't bite either. But I mean, that's more because of the climate in publishing today is such that you really can only publish things that are like on message politically. And so, what this has led to, in my opinion, is all of these different disciplines have been captured by this consensus thinking, and it's created an opportunity for outsiders to kind of like pick up where they left off and do the good work that they had been doing but no longer do. So Graham Hancock doing archaeology or investigative journalism on archaeology, you doing investigative scholarly work on Edward de Vere, and
Robert Prechter, Alexander Waugh, Roger Strittmatter, Hank
there we
Whittemore.
go.
Yeah,
And people like Matt Forney at Terror House publishing works like Dragon Day by Matt Pegas, my co-host, Nutcracker by me, and very many other works like the Static Age, which is upcoming from Bad Billy Pratt, which features an essay by none other than Joe, who read at the reading. We're talking about Junker Joe on Twitter, and and Expat, where you had your story published. There are kind of like alternatives to the mainstream in literature in all of these areas that are emerging. And I think we're at a very interesting cultural moment in that sense, with a lot of opportunities. What do you think?
Absolutely.
Phoebe?
Absolutely. I just want to flag, I think I have to wrap up in a couple minutes because I'm wanted at a holiday party. But no, I think you're right. I think that like it's very weird. I think we're at a weird like generational cleft, because I think that people, we're in this moment where it really does feel like everything's broken and nothing works. And so our relationship, for me, like just, to outsiders, for like, these things like Harvard, or let's say the public theater, or like Broadway, or, I also, by the way, had an experience of, I have a graphic novel that I've been sitting on for like several years, and I shopped it around to like every young adult publisher in New York, like straight up. And I think I really stand by it. I think it's really solid work. And it got it was very well received by like dozens and dozens of people that I sent it to, and they often wanted to read more. And then they said a bunch of things. First of all, the main characters are actually is African-American. And so I think that was like basically the sense that I got, was that it's a total non-starter. No one would touch it. Young adult fiction is actually like kind of the wokest industry you're going to find. Like, it's like you read all these weird stories about like the Chinese woman who got her like her book deal canceled because people weirdly misinterpreted as saying something that it wasn't even saying. And like young adult is crazy. And so it's a graphic novel, kind of like an adventure story for young adults. And like I'm not even sure when or if, I'll eventually we'll figure it out. But I really was I was just like, yeah, it's not the moment. Like right now, like it's like the fact that I, as like a person who's not a person of color, wrote a thing, and even like, yeah, so that was just a total non-starter, and it was just radioactive and no one would touch it, even though I think that the work was high quality. And even if it wasn't high quality, whatever. But yeah, it's just funny seeing the generational divide in terms of like, I've like this is something I talked to about, like the Oxfordians, who are generally older, and for them, they really are bummed out that they're not at Harvard or whatever, that really upsets them. And I'm like, guys, I have good news for you. I mean, there's good news and bad news, which is like, the West is falling and all of our institutions are like irreparably damaged and will not survive. But on the bright side, that's good for Oxfordianism. And like basically the smartest people that I know who are young and cool, don't give a shit, had a horror. Like for me, it's funny. It's like, I think, there's the Simon and Garfunkel song. It's like, when I think back on all the crap I learned in high school, it's a wonder I can think at all. I feel like boomers get that like high school was fake, and like your hometown, everybody was small-minded and stupid and it was fake, but then you went to college and then you learned real shit. Whereas I feel like people in our generation, there's a shift, or maybe even more Zoomers, who, God bless them, have had to deal with this like pandemic thing at the beginning of their like college careers or whatever, if they're going. Like, I feel like now I think if I meet somebody and they're like, college was such an amazing experience, I learned so much in college, I'm like, red flag, red flag, red flag, red. You know what I mean? Like, I feel like now college to me is like even more of like a weird normie, like a college enjoyer is like even worse than a high school enjoyer. Or if anything, maybe the high school enjoyer is like somebody who's like well adjusted and cool and doesn't have like I was not a high school enjoyer. I was maybe a college enjoyer, but
well, I mean,
I say this to the Oxfordian scholars. I'm like, you guys, no one cares. Like young people, and that was me at first when I started to make my first like TikTok video that I made. I was wearing like a collared shirt because I thought it would be a subliminal appeal to authority and make me seem more serious. Guess how much people on TikTok care about whether or not you seem like you have like a educational background. Not a fig, my friend. It's like people really don't care at all about the credentialism. And I think it's dangerous. And I think, as we've sort of alluded to, there is something that's very perilous about having a society where it's like all the credentials are like defunct and it seems like chaotic and a free for all. But it does seem like right now the most robust, truest ideas will have an opportunity to find audiences that they've maybe been denied for decades, if not centuries. And so that's a good news, limited silver lining for Oxfordians.
Absolutely. I mean, I think college enjoyers today, that's like being a propaganda enjoyer. And it's just
Nazi. Yeah, it's a propaganda enjoyer. Yeah.
It's like it's stupid. Like no one really is like, oh, I'm a propaganda enjoyer. No one would really want to claim that. So you are saying that you don't believe obvious propaganda is propaganda. And so it's like, I think, very much so. I think
maybe there's a moral sanctimony, which is like, I know that it's obviously propaganda, and I kind of know that it's not true, but I'm willing to accept the bullshit because I know that I'm on the right side of history and I have this like moral standing that makes me okay that I'm telling lies.
Yeah, which is definitely worse.
Yeah.
It's I mean,
no, like, I think there's one thing to be a dumb person that doesn't have the ability to discern truth from bullshit, and to be like swindled and to like be like, I'm just confused, I'm just disoriented, I'm going to do this and that because I've been told it and I'm dumb and I've been like led like a herd animal. But I think that you're right, that there's something sinister and evil about somebody who's smart, but they think that they know it's propaganda, but they're going to be on the team of the people that are generating the propaganda because they think it's the right team. And maybe, I don't know, maybe they're right. Maybe it's good to give propaganda. Maybe it's all great.
From the very beginning, like I remember even before I started New Right, I was talking, I think I was actually talking with Justin Murphy, and I described how I think like essentially anyone who disagrees with the mainstream consensus is on the right, because like if you disagree, you're automatically a disbeliever, a dissident, or what have you. And so, I'm not to get into political distinctions. I'm sure there are like many between you and me, and many between people on my side or whatever. But I think in general, what has happened is the cultural right has claimed the arts, really, because like the actual like the institutions, the kind of progressive and establishment left institutions are not, they're incapable of producing good art. And
Tell me about it. Oh my God.
So like,
oh my God.
On the right, where like, I mean, like there's certainly some gatekeeping, certainly some people on the right are like, oh, you can't write stories like this. It's degenerate, it's this or that. But I think in general, it's just kind of like, there's room for artists to breathe. We are, both, and many of the people we've spoken to and know are pursuing these kind of outsider paths that are, bringing the truth to light. And the truth is not, necessarily political. The truth is something that just is. And so, I mean, I think we are on the right track, and like the best art is happening outside of the mainstream. It's happening in Eco Village. It's happening in
the Nutcracker by Dan.
It's happening in Nutcracker, which everyone should read and buy multiple copies of. And it's happening in Bushwick townhouses where Matt Forney holds readings, which was very fun, and I'm sure he'll do it again. And and it's most certainly happening on January 28th, the second De Vere Ball. Everyone should come. I mean, frankly, the last one sold out, so you better get your ticket soon, or you're not going to be able to meet you're not going to be able to meet Phoebe, but you're also not going to be able to meet whoever these mystery guests are.
Yeah.
And like it was Curtis Yarvin last time, so who knows? It could be anyone.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's stay tuned.
Could be anyone living or dead. Hint, hint.
Yeah, could be Edward de Vere.
Be a misdirect.
Exhumed.
Could be. We could have zooming in Edward de Vere. Thank you so much for having me, and this is really a pleasure. I've been looking forward to it for a while, and it didn't miss. Cool.